Hey, moms in real estate. We are so excited because it is that time again for our monthly marketing meetup with the powerhouse team of Real Social. And so we have Whitney and Kim joining Kristen and I today. And Kristen, you just shared what you want to talk about today, and I'm pretty excited to talk about this.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about how we can incorporate storytelling into our social medias because I feel like it's kind of a challenge for me. So I'm sure it's a challenge for some of you.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Sorry, Whitney, I just wanted to say real quick, I was talking to an agent last night and she sent me a picture of like the cattle that she was rounding up for her client. Her client literally packed up, moved out of New Mexico, started a new life in I think Florida, and like didn't just leave her to sell the house. Like her cattle got out, she had to round up the cattle, all kinds of things. And I was like, you need to tell this story. And she's like, I'm just not sure how. And so when you said that, Kristen, I was like, oh my gosh, I know our agents need this.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just really telling that you're in a position where you understand how important storytelling is, because I just think people don't necessarily understand not only not how to do it, but like why it matters so much. And in a world where everyone's starting to get on social media and the landscape is changing rapidly, it's no longer the place where if you're there, then you're standing out. You have to learn how to stand out. Storytelling becomes the superpower engine to help you do that. And it's the thing that makes you memorable and relatable. And so, understanding, I think, why it's so important is the first job, and then figuring out how all of the things that you're already doing in your business become those stories to help it seem more natural and not like you're pulling things out of your tail to try and like tell stories online, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
like taking notes because I always forget what I want to say.
Yeah, my note page is like I can't even read it. So many things. Where's the thing?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think for really like any industry, but particularly when it comes to real estate, I think we underestimate what we see every day. I think we become almost like, I don't want to say like callous, but I think we are in really unique situations all the time. So how do you relate that back to your business? How can you relate that back to your brand? It's one thing to just share the story, but how can you show it in a way where you got to be a little bit smart about it and make it align? So, like, if you're chasing cattle on a farm because your clients aren't there, well, how do you bring that back to, I'm the type of agent that's going to go above and beyond, including like getting your Mavericks back into the pen or whatever you say. I don't even know the right language, but I think,
You're
but I
from
think that
Texas. How do you not know?
I know, y'all. I knew it's called a Maverick. But I do think that's part of it, is not just telling a story, like how do you make it amplify your brand and what you want people to remember you for? But then I think a big thing is, and maybe this is just where I currently feel like I am in my career, it's like, who is the hero of your story? And really, I don't think it should ever be you. Like I don't think these are stories that should be about us. I think you have to find the subtlety of sharing the story. And obviously, you're probably solving some problems and making the story and hopefully in a good way. But it's really the journey about whoever it is you're serving, right? And how do you share that in a way that's kind of captivating?
The really good news for people who want to market themselves as being good at their work, but feel kind of strange and weird about it, making your client the hero of the story is a really great way to take that pressure off too. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, Kim.
Yeah.
Well, and I was just thinking about it like with that one, like, the bravery to like actually be brave enough to pick up and move to another state, right? Like, so sometimes we overcomplicate it and we think like, how do we position that? But, a lot of people would relate to just like a client being brave enough to pick up and move to another state and trust somebody and leave somebody behind. And it does both things, right? It shows that the agent goes the extra mile, but it shows like the client that's thinking about moving, like you can be brave enough, you can do this, and you can actually start your life somewhere else.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, think
I've
about the shows that you guys like. I mean, my kids right now are really into The Office, and I think it's hilarious
lucky.
because hopefully they don't get all the humor. I think they get more than I think they do. But I think, there's not a laugh track in The Office, right? And so I think when you can find the way to like, highlight the story, but it's not like, but like it doesn't always have to have this like you know, canned laughter with it. It's just either finding, and I think you really have to find your tone as a storyteller. Maybe you're like super funny, maybe you're super sarcastic, maybe you're like really analytical or serious, maybe you're sappy, like maybe things all like make you emotional. I think you have to show up as that storyteller, because otherwise it's just not an alignment of being, you know, the person who you really are.
Mhm.
I have a question for you guys. So if I'm about to tell a story, I think where sometimes it's hard for me is like how to start it. I hate being like, hey guys, like I feel like a newscaster. I'm like, okay, hold on,
Mhm.
settle down. And then I always have trouble ending it too. So
Yeah.
what do you guys say for starting and finishing?
So I always like to explain when you're crafting a story that there's a story arc, right? There's a beginning, a middle, and the end, and there's an ultimate like lesson or story to the story, right? Like the so what factor. So when you're engineering these stories, I want you to think about what is the thing in the beginning that gets their attention. We in our business call it the hook, right? Like how can we grab their attention out of the gate? Sometimes we might start with the middle of the story. So instead of saying, "Oh my God, you're not going to believe this," you pop on and you'd say, "My client's listing flooded." And then immediately you have their attention. You started in the middle of the story, so then you can kind of reverse and then go back and explain to them, here's the circumstance of what happened, you know, here's what we're doing. And then of course you always need to think about why in the world am I telling them this story? What do I want them to take away from it? So just because you assume they understand the moral of the story doesn't mean that they do. So in the tail end, I want you to always like recap and tie it up in a pretty bow for them and explain to them. So if you're the kind of person who is XYZ, make sure you're doing this one thing or whatever. If you're trying to solve a problem for them, whatever that thing is. So hook them out of the gate. Make sure that you understand the full story arc of what you're going to say before you hop on. So that way you're not rambling. And then tie it up in a pretty bow at the tail end with the moral of the story. And I also like to tell people to think about their stories in different segments. So you're going to have big and small, sort of macro and micro stories. And then you're going to have like stories that explain the heart behind the work that you do, and then stories that showcase the value of the work that you do. They're all different, right? And so big stories might be like your overarching journey in real estate and how you got here, right? Or it might be, the big story about a client who you've served in multiple different homes and they're finally in their forever home. That's a big, a macro story, right? A micro story might be the yellow jackets that your client found today in their home that you had to help problem solve, right? So a small little moment in time. Then when it comes to the either like the why we do it or the why there's value in our work, that emotional mission, heart behind the work, why we show up and do this stuff every day, those are stories that you want to be telling once a week. Once a week, you want to be showing the heart behind your work through storytelling. And then potentially once a week, you might showcase the value of the work you do, like how you connected your clients to a couple of people who are going to help them, or how you solved a problem, or you saved them $10,000 because you recommended the right lender for them, or whatever. I don't know. Right. But the stories that show the value of your work and the stories that show the heart behind your work, those are two different stories and different levers that you definitely need to be using when it comes to storytelling online.
And they're both really important, you know, but you don't want to show up as just a one trick pony where you're either only sharing one of those. I mean, that is really important for them to understand who you are as a whole person, right?
Mhm.
But I also think you've got to think it through a little bit. Like, I mean, Whitney's saying, like, think about what you're going to say. I think so many of us think of a story that is probably 10 chapters long. And you need to just tell half of one chapter. You could do a series, you could do 20 stories that tell this whole book. But I think we often try to say too much in each, you know, if it's a reel or if you're sharing even in stories, there's so much that we try to pack into those moments. And I think you just have to be a little bit, I mean, practice the art of brevity. You know, you really have to think through, okay, what is the point of this one story? One story could seriously have like 6 different messages. But if you're going to tell it, really think about like, what am I trying to get across, and just stick to that. There's going to be stuff that maybe you would tell your girlfriends that you don't need to put in this story. um, just stick to, you know, it's like you're crafting your brand. So you've got to be okay editing it. You know what I mean? And I don't mean editing like editing. I mean this kind of editing.
And yeah, I mean, just making sure you ask yourself that question. So what? Why am I telling this? What do I want them to do? Right? Like before you even hop on to tell the story, make sure you understand the so what before you start. Like that's the most critical part.
Sometimes I think it helps like talking to somebody about, I mean, Whitney and I do this with our one-on-one clients. We will sit there and say, you know, tell us what has happened this month. And it's like some of our most favorite moments because we're like, oh my gosh, these are so juicy. But you have to sort of start sharing it. And then you're like, well, what part of that really does make sense strategically for my brand versus just, you know, like the gossip circle. You know, you don't ever want it to come across like that. I think you have to always be, these platforms, I just feel like, especially now, are so great for showing your value and showing what you do on a daily basis in a way that, you know, other marketing tactics can't. You know, like an email isn't going to get all that across. A mailer isn't going to get all that across. You at an open house isn't going to get all that across, you know, but for you to think through, okay, what is it that I am really good at? And this story helps illustrate how I'm good at that. That's a story you should tell. If it's something you're like, it's not something that you're good at, I mean, it's okay to show those moments too, to be vulnerable, but just be, you know, be strategic in your thinking.
I feel like that was so good for me to hear because I feel like I just feel like you gave me what I needed to move forward. So thank you.
You tell
You're
that
welcome.
story, baby.
You tell it.
Well, I think
my notes later.
I think, Kim, you hit it on the head because I'm a details person. Like I often say, the deeper in relationship we are, the more I care about you, the more details you get, right? And I'm that person that like gives you the whole like leading up factor. My husband's like, just get to the point. And I'm like, no, I need you to understand. And so that is something I struggle with on social. And so Whitney, when you were like, pull out that one thing, I was like, it's so hard sometimes because I feel like, you know, if there's missing context, then the value is not going to be perceived. But I really do think changing your framework around like, what is the takeaway that I want to get them versus, you know, sometimes I'm like, well, I don't know if they got the takeaway. And it's because I just fire hose them with so much extra information that they missed it. And so I really love like that think tank. And I kind of want to plug you guys and ask a question. So if somebody is working directly with you, is that something that they can do where they can kind of say, like, if they're struggling with how do I tell the story? Where do I get the story? Where they're like having a conversation with you and you guys are pulling it out kind of like, here's what you could tell. Here's what you could tell. Is that something that you guys actually do with your clients?
Yes, the woman sitting above me on the screen is a genius at that.
So good at it.
The one sitting below me is also pretty darn good at it too. I'll be honest. She's pretty darn good.
Here's the thing is, we all have the stories, right? We're all experiencing things all the time, but I do think it often helps to have somebody help you curate the story. It's hard to do this. I mean, you're the expert in something else, and now you're going to try to be an expert in marketing what you're doing so great. And it's a really hard toggle for people. And Whitney and I always joke, I mean, when we're talking about social, it's like, it's social. That's the word. So like, if you're stuck, find a friend, find us, you know, I mean, like you can talk through these things to, you know, to hopefully get the message across. But I think we just make it harder than we need to 99% of the time. You know, I think when people get stuck and they're like, I don't know what part of the story to share, I would say, what would you tell like your best friend? You know what, and not necessarily like all the details, but like what would be the thing that you would want them to remember about the story, and kind of start there. Sometimes you have to maybe reverse engineer it, but I just think we overcomplicate it and then you never share the story.
So
Yeah,
true.
and not to feel bad if you're like, I know I'm good at what I do, but I can't seem to wrap my mind around how to articulate it, because you're so close to that work every day that it makes it hard for you to recognize the nuggets that are really valuable stories to tell. So if you're out there watching this and you're like, I'm a good real estate agent, but I have no idea what to say or what to do. Trust us when I say that we hear that all the time. And that doesn't, you know, it doesn't mean that you're not great at what you do. It just means you might need a sounding board to help you really iron out which of these stories make the most sense, that help elevate my work and showcase what I'm good at, right?
Yeah,
Well,
thank you
Whitney,
for pointing that out, because I do feel like a lot of people are so close to it. I know I am, and like having you guys is huge help for me. So I'm like, I have no idea.
and what Whitney just said echoes what Kim said, which is like, you don't have to be a marketing expert. And can I just like, let me be the one here to maybe have the unpopular opinion. But I feel like so many really good agents that are solid producers, that are highly skilled, that are crushing it in business, are being diminished right now and deflated on social because of the people that are good at social and at marketing. And I think that there's a huge injustice happening to agents right now, where agents feel like they're less than. And I mean, there's even moments where I question myself, and in this conversation, I'm like, that's something we have to remember. Like, not being good at social media doesn't have a direct correlation on whether or not you're good at real estate, and vice versa. There's agents, and I'm not like pointing any fingers, but there's agents out there that are freaking crushing it on social media, that have tens of thousands of followers and are teaching these different things, and they don't necessarily have the production business that you'd want to have. So I think it's such an important takeaway to understand that the two are very separate. And in any business, as a solid business owner, finding the right person to sit in the right seat is what you do. That's how you scale a business. And so I think that rather than putting the weight on yourself to say like, okay, now I've got to figure out social media and I have to do all these things. No, you just have to figure out the right person to make sure that your brand has a social media presence.
Yeah, please. If you're a big agent crushing it and your social sucks, hire somebody. Like, I cannot handle sometimes when I go to some agents' profiles. I'm like,
but it feels like, I'm very blessed and fortunate that I have a very solid, production business. But I'm going to tell you that I personally have felt the pressure to also be the social expert, right? Like, to also have the good profile to have. And I'm personally at the point where I'm like, where are my ladies over 40 that just are going to have the hot mess grid? Because those are my people. Like, we just need to talk and connect. But I feel that pressure because it's like a real thing in our industry now, where it's not like the louder voice is not saying collaborate, find your person, get the help. The louder voice is saying, take my course and become a social media expert. Take my course and become a social media influencer. That's what the louder voice is saying.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
you bring up.
Oh, you go, Whit.
No, you go. Little Miss Production. I want to hear from the one who's got a killer production volume.
I mean, so this is like just the truth that maybe some people don't want to hear, is that perception is going to trump reality. And so if you are having success and you're doing well, but you're not showing up on social, that eventually is going to hurt at some point. I don't know when, and I don't know, everybody has their own goals, but there are people who are jumping into that. And I actually think if I were jumping into the business and I were new, I would lean all in on social, because the reverse of what we were just saying is true. It's like, okay, so it is hard to get started and to get the clients and to get the transactions under your belt. If you can show up and talk like you know what you're doing, and you can offer value to an audience, they're not going to care. And so I think it's like you choose, right? Like, and I just think people think they have to show up and be like a Ryan Serhant, and it's like, they don't. You just have to show up and be yourself. But people feel like you have to be something, either massively huge or somebody that's super polished, or you have to come across like you've already know how to do this. And I'm not going to say no one, but I think a lot of people struggle with the struggle factor. It's like anytime you're learning something new, there's that part that just sucks. You've got to learn it. You got to be in it. You got to push through those moments. And a lot of people aren't willing to do it.
Yeah. I mean, you either master it or you pay somebody to master it for you.
Yeah. Or a mix of both.
Yeah, or a combo.
Well, and I mean, I think the biggest takeaway is that, and I agree, Kim, unless you're an exiting agent. I was doing a training and I had an agent talking to me about social, and then I went back to her goals, and she said, she's no more than 2 years out from retirement. So if she's truly going into full retirement, that's an exception of an agent that I don't think needs to really focus on social. She needs to focus on servicing her past clients and, moving her book of business on. But for those of us that plan on being in the industry, one way or another, you need to be leveraging social, because it's the one place that you can speak one to many, right? And it is the one place that you can authentically show up and essentially act as a magnet to attract the people that you want to work with. And so it's a beautiful thing, but we don't have to overcomplicate it. There are amazing resources such as Whitney and Kim that can walk you through it. And also, like we're talking about today with storytelling, there just has to be a little bit of intentionality where we sit down and we are just intentional in what we're going to extract and we're going to share, so that we take them along a journey that is serving with them. Same thing that you said, Kim, like we want to make the client, in the stories, we want to make the clients the heroes, but equally in telling the stories, we want to deliver the value, even though we want to tell the whole story. We just need to take out the sections that are valuable to others.
Yeah, be the guide. There's a book Donald Miller wrote. It's all about the art of storytelling. So, but it's like you are the guide, right? And I mean, I'm all about like the ninja philosophy, and that's how I operate my business, in which, you are showing up with value, and eventually business just follows, right? And so I think these platforms are so great for that, because these are where you can share these stories of value. I think we live in the space that some people touch once a decade. And so I think oftentimes that's where like we forget that not everybody is looking at settlement statements all the time. Not everybody's dealing with an inspection all the time. And so it's almost, having conversations with some of your favorite clients and just like getting their language, like what did they love about the service that you offered? What were their biggest frustrating points in their transaction with you? And not in a way where they have to like criticize you, but just understand the pain points that they have. And that can create really good stories, but you've got to get their words, not these industry words that we're talking to each other. You know what I mean? You've got to use their language, because it's obviously just going to resonate better with the people who you want to be working with.
Yeah, please do. Because I feel like I see so many people talking in their industry language where I'm like, what are you talking about? Dumb it down.
I used to, oh my gosh, you guys, in a former life, I had a client who, this was when I was in advertising, and it was like a giant computer, I don't know that I should say who it was, but big computer manufacturer. And all of our meetings, people would speak in acronyms. I was like, what are we even talking about? It would every other word would be like a three letter, acronym. And I'm like, I don't know what this is about.
No clue. Yeah, it's too hard, and I don't want to know. And the minute you forget it.
I feel like that's the medical industry. I was just with my husband last week in the hospital, and every time I'm in the hospital with him or with any family member, people are like, oh, are you in the medical field? And I'm like, no, I just have learned your language. Like, I just learned how you speak, and then I'm able to speak it. And all of a sudden, like, they're like, oh, you must be one of us.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, and that's part of it, is that when you're going to be sharing a story, just always remember that you're sharing this with, the audience that you want to be attracting, right? So it's just, I think there is an element of strategy in all of it. I think sometimes that can be really intimidating, but I think if you really just visualize your favorite clients that you've worked with, what words they use, what things they loved, where they got frustrated, there's so much gold in stories in just that one transaction that you could tell over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Kim, I think that's super important. One thing I always like, people will ask me about like my client experience and how it got to be like so robust. And I always say I layered on one item at a time, but the way that I did that was through debriefing. So every time I closed a transaction, it was like, what did I really love? Where was the experience like lackluster? What could I build on it? And so when you just said that, it made me think about that, like debriefing and just looking at each client and really debriefing and extracting like, okay, how did I get this client? What was even the language, like the different things that got them, and just continuing to do that. The storytelling really will allow you to niche down. And I think it also allows us to be selective, because when we have a client or something that's totally out of our wheelhouse that we don't want to continue, we don't tell those stories. And then don't be afraid of, and would you agree? I think you'd agree with this, Kim and Whitney. Don't be afraid of, like you said, one story could actually be 5 or 6 different social media posts. And I think, again, in our industry, we get in our head and we're like, okay, but it's the same house. Like, I don't want people, I've thought this. I'm like, I have so many stories around this one farmhouse right now. And I want to tell the story specifically because I want more farmhouses. I want more of those business. I want more of those clients. And I do have other listings and I do have other things, but I don't necessarily, again, very, very honored to serve them, but it's not necessarily what I want to attract more. And so I had to have a talk with myself on like, it's okay to tell more than one story about one property or one client. What would you say to, kind of that?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you want to be known for something, you have to repeat yourself over and over again. And they're not paying close enough attention to realize that you're only talking about one singular farmhouse. They think you're talking about farmhouses. And if they are paying that close attention, then great. Congratulations. You have a winning fan who is watching every move you make, and they're really dialed into what you're doing. They're much more likely to become a client because they're paying close attention. Like, I would not worry one pretty second on it. And if you're really that worried about it, space them out. Like, do one video per week on that farmhouse instead of doing every single day of the week, right?
Yeah.
We hear it often. Like people say, "Oh, well, I already did a video on that," and we're like, "Yes, and do another
And
one." Like, I mean, there are certain things that you do have to repeat yourself, and we think people are hanging on to every word that we're saying, and guess what, guys? They're not. That's why you have to show up, and consistency is the name of the game. And you don't have to come up with like these brand new ideas every time. Like there are probably 3 to 5 messages that you could repeat over and over and over again in different ways, or you're just in a different setting, but you want to be known for a few things. Be a master of a few things. You don't need to be generic and feel like you can only talk about something once. That just doesn't mean any marketing. People spend billions of dollars on like little phrases that you're going to see over and over and over again. That's why Nike is the swoosh and just do it. That's billions and billions of dollars paying for 3 words that you don't even need the 3 words anymore. You actually know what it is.
Yeah, and I'd like to remind you that when you watch a show on Hulu, they play the same commercial every 15 minutes. You think these companies are sitting back there thinking, we got to diversify. They're going to give us 4 commercials during the show. We need 4 different ones. Hell, no. They make one, they run that same bad boy over and over and over again. Well, shit, if it's good enough for them.
Am I the only one that has kids that sing like the Ozempic songs? Like my grandma, I'm like, this is horrible, but that's how bad they repeat. Is literally they can sing the songs, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, ladies, we always appreciate you coming and delivering value to our tribe. And as always, if you're looking to spice up your social, we highly suggest that you connect with Whitney and Kim with Real Social, and they can help you out there. And we will be back again next month. Let us know if you have any questions, and we can answer those live. Bye, guys.